Alright, on the last video on this channel, an architecture demo was built using AWS Lambda, EventBridge, and CloudWatch. Check that video out if you haven't seen it. The application accepts messages through a Lambda function URL, routes them asynchronously through EventBridge, and then processes them with a moderation Lambda function. But in the original walkthrough, all of the AWS infrastructure was done manually. So now, I'm going to show you how to use OpenTofu to automatically deploy the entire environment, including Lambda functions, IAM roles, and EventBridge resources. So for this infrastructure as code demo, I decided to use Terraform, but more specifically, I'm going to be using OpenTofu, which is a direct fork of Terraform that remains fully open source because HashiCorp decided to move Terraform to business source. There are a few ways to install OpenTofu and the AWS CLI, and for this project I decided on using winget because it's one of the recommended methods that you can find on the OpenTofu website. So to get started installing OpenTofu, we're going to run this command here, winget install exact id opentofu.tofu. We're going to run that. Now that that's installed, we can do tofu commands. Next, to install AWS CLI, we're going to run winget install amazon.aws CLI. Run that. Okay, it's successfully installed. So, I made a fork of the project from the last video in order to test out my infrastructure as code demo. We're going to navigate to that in our terminal. There we go. Run this. Now that we're in the root folder, we're also going to navigate to this new folder I created in the project called infra. It's got some new .tf files, which stood for Terraform and can also stand for tofu. I've created all these for this demo. I have main.tf that contains all the resources that we'll be needing from AWS, outputs.tf, and variables.tf. So type in cd infra to switch to that folder. For this demo, I'm running OpenTofu locally instead of through something like GitHub Actions or through a CI/CD runner to keep the setup simple. But in order to do that, you'll probably need an access key. So navigate to your IAM user and click Create Access Key. Select Command Line Interface, hit Confirm, then hit Next. This part doesn't really matter, it's just a description. You click Create Access Key, and it gives you a one-time access key. It'll create an access key that you can only see from this page until you close it. You'll need both of these, and you'll have to type it into your terminal. Type in AWS configure, and when you do that, it'll ask you for your key ID, your secret access key, your default region, and the default output format, which I set as JSON. After you're done configuring, it will save your credentials to a local folder, probably under users .aws credentials. And that way, OpenTofu will be able to access your AWS environment. Now, from the new infra folder, I'm going to run tofu init, and that is going to create some local files for us. Now, inside the infra folder, you'll find a new .terraform folder, and that's a local cache for OpenTofu that contains downloaded provider plugins like the AWS provider. You'll find terraform.lock.hcl, and that keeps the provider versions consistent. And then there'll be a couple more files that show up once we actually run the TF files. For now, we'll look a little bit at main. Here's where we configure the AWS provider and region. We've got some local variables, and then the actual event bus, IAM roles, Lambda functions, the EventBridge rules. And the cool thing about OpenTofu is that you just have to describe the end result of all the resources you want, and it will figure out all the stuff like the order that it needs to deploy in and stuff like that. Now, we go back to our terminal and we'll run tofu validate. By running that, it validates the configuration syntax, says it's a success. Then we run tofu plan. This shows the execution plan before anything is deployed. Here we can see all the resources that we described in main. Finally, run tofu apply. It asks if you're sure. You can just say yes. And there, it creates all the resources. I also have it giving the function URL that we'll need later that I set in my output.tf file. You'll also notice this new terraform.tf state file, and that just records all the infrastructure including AWS IDs and ARNs. Now, when we go to our Lambda functions, we can see that the two Lambdas that we told OpenTofu to create earlier are both here. So we're going to do the same test as we did last time. Go to the function URL. This looks correct. Type in something like hello. Message handed off for moderation. This one seems to work. We'll also try something like crap to test something that should be flagged. Go to the moderation Lambda, and under monitor and CloudWatch logs, if we go to the latest log stream and then filter by demo, we see our logs. Hello is clean, crap is flagged. Another one of the major benefits of infrastructure as code is that teardown can also be automated. If we go back to our terminal and type in tofu destroy and run that, it will know how to delete all the different resources because of that state file from earlier. 14 destroyed. Also, make sure you include this new section in your git ignore to ignore all of this stuff that should remain local. Overall, this has been a great exercise in AWS services and infrastructure as code automation using OpenTofu. My name's Jeremy Harrison, and you can find me on LinkedIn by following the link in the description or the pinned comment. Thanks.